Salutations, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 23 of the one they call Broccoli by Texiliaz. As always, the link to the fic will be in the description below. And with that out of the way, let's jump on into it. Chapter 23, Accepting Help Isn't a Weakness. Chapter Summary. Broccoli wakes up alone for the first time in 3 years, and Izuku has to face the consequences of his actions. Author's notes. Hello everyone! So, we apparently reached 100k words last chapter. Wow. I'm back from the convention now. Hope you enjoyed this little chapter. I had to once again cut it in two. It got too long. Trigger warning. Self-isolation, self-harm, starvation. Izuku's point of view. When Broccoli woke up the next morning, he was feeling more tired than when he went to sleep. The sweaters, although comfy, hadn't done much to protect him from the hard and cold floor of the shed, leaving his body aching. Not to mention, the air in the shed was both chilly and dusty, making him sneeze as soon as he stepped paw outside of his makeshift nest. But all in all, it wasn't the worst sleep he'd ever gotten, though it certainly hadn't been that great either. Broccoli shuddered, making the dust fly around him and causing him to sneeze again. He did not look forward to doing this for several more days. With a sigh, he changed back into his human form, and Izuku started getting ready for school. If he hurried, he might even be able to take a quick shower at the school gym before homeroom starts. After a quick shower, Izuku felt a lot more awake and, not to mention, clean. But as he walked through the hallways of UA, his stomach started growling, unpleasantly, screaming for food after not having eaten anything since lunch yesterday. The vestiges kept pestering him to go grab something to eat from the cafeteria, insisting that lunch rush would understand and give him something if he just explained. But Izuku shook his head stubbornly, and stubbornly kept walking towards his classroom. He was already cutting it tight after having taken that shower, and he really didn't want to be late. Besides, it was fine. He was fine. After all, he had managed much worse in the past. He could handle being hungry for a few more hours. What he couldn't handle, however, was seeing how utterly exhausted his dad looked when he stepped into the classroom that morning. Aizawa-sensei was pale, his eye bags even darker than usual, and he looked like he hadn't gotten a wink of sleep. Which he perhaps hadn't. Guilt twisted his stomach and made his throat burn. Shrinking down in his seat, Izuku turned away and bit his lip to stop it from trembling. He felt a hand covering his own, and he stared before he looked down, only to find his left hand covering his right one. His left thumb was rubbing calming circles into the scarred skin. All the while, waves of reassuring words and feelings came from the vestiges. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Izuku sat up a bit straighter, muttering out a quiet thanks. There was a hum in his mind, and after a few more moments, he felt himself gain back the control of his hand. But even with the control back, he kept rubbing circles around his scars, the repetitive motion feeling oddly soothing. It was around the end of homeroom that Izuku's stomach decided to make itself heard again. Most of his classmates were already on their way out of the room, but at the sound of his growling stomach, some of them stopped and looked over. Izuku just ducked his head and grabbed his bag, ready to head out with the others, when a hand on his shoulder stopped him in his tracks. "Midoriya, a word," Aizawa said, looking down at him with what most would assume was his usual bored expression. But Izuku noticed the worry in his eyes, and he cursed internally when he saw it. The man already had enough to worry about. He didn't need a problem child to cause him any more stress. As soon as the last student left the room and they were alone, Aizawa turned to him, and Izuku tried really hard not to flinch under the man's hard gaze. Have you been eating properly? Aizawa asked sternly. Izuku opened his mouth to answer, but before he could even say a word, his stomach answered for him, growling loudly again. Aizawa raised an eyebrow at him, and Izuku shamefully fiddled with the front of his uniform, refusing to look the man in the eyes as he quietly shook his head. There was a moment of silence before he heard Aizawa sigh deeply and mutter something under his breath. Izuku's shoulders hiked up even further, almost reaching his ears as he tried to make himself as small as possible. He was just about to apologize when something was thrust in front of his face. Izuku blinked in surprise and leaned back to look up at his teacher. Here, you shouldn't go to gym class on an empty stomach, the man said, holding out what Izuku now recognized was one of his jelly pouches. And as much as Izuku wanted to refuse, something told him that his teacher wouldn't take no for an answer. That's why, with trembling hands, he reached out and took the offered food. Thank you, Aizawa-sensei, Izuku said quietly, flashing the man an embarrassed and wobbly smile. Aizawa didn't return the smile, though, and instead just kept frowning at him. Don't mention it. Just make sure to eat, especially before practical classes, he muttered, before pausing and looking him over, like he was expecting to find some sort of injury or something. And if you ever need anything at all, you can talk to one of us, teachers. Our doors are always open, he continued, giving Izuku a stern look. Izuku fought real hard to keep his smile on his face, and he let out a small chuckle, though it sounded forced even to his own ears. Yes, I will. Thank you again, but I should probably go now, he stuttered, already making his way over to the door, ignoring the way his teacher was still staring at him. Anyway, bye, Sensei. And with that, he rushed out of the classroom, leaving a frowning Aizawa behind. Izuku only slowed down and let himself breathe once he reached the courtyard. His classmates were probably already at the gym, and he was walking quickly to catch up, jelly pouch in hand, when his stomach growled again. With a sigh, Izuku unscrewed the pouch and took a sip. It was grape-flavored, one of Shoda's favorites. It wasn't until he tasted something salty that Izuku realized he had started to cry, his tears mixing with the jelly. Frustrated, Izuku wiped away his tears with his sleeve and quickly finished the food, his heart constricting painfully in his chest the whole time. Quietly, privately, he decided that maybe, just for tonight, perhaps Broccoli could go home, just to let them know he was okay. And then the next time he disappears, they hopefully won't be as worried. Nodding to himself, Izuku forced down his guilt and pushed forwards towards the gym. He couldn't afford to break here. He had class to get to. Toshinori's point of view. It was nearing dinner, and they still hadn't seen any sign of little Broccoli. Toshinori was obviously worried, but his partner was even worse. Shoda was currently pacing the office, glancing out the window every few minutes to see if he could spot the little cat. Meanwhile, Slushy sat on the windowsill, her back straight as she stared intensely out the window, much like she had done all of last night. The poor thing even slept up there, and barely wanted any breakfast this morning. Toshinori sighed and was just about to once again ask Shoda to please come and eat dinner, when the man tensed and suddenly rushed out of the office, Slushy meowing and wasting no time in following him. Blinking in surprise, Toshinori looked out the window and took in a sharp breath as he saw the small, fluffy kitten walking underneath the streetlights. He heard their front door open and Shoda called out something, only for the kitten to stop, his ears twitching and tail going straight up before he rushed forward, presumably towards Shoda. With a smile, Toshinori stepped into the hallway to find Shoda cradling Broccoli while Slushy stood next to his feet and tried to climb his leg. "Where have you been?" Shoda asked sternly, looking the small cat over for any injuries. Broccoli just meowed in response, seemingly perfectly fine as he cuddled against Shoda, letting out one of the loudest purrs that Toshinori had ever heard in his life. Toshinori let out a deep sigh of relief and stepped up to them, feeling his lips tug up into a smile as the kitten turned his green eyes towards them before he meowed adorably. "Please don't disappear like that again, little one. You really scared us," Toshinori said softly, giving him a scratch behind the ear. As soon as he said that, Broccoli tensed and leaned away. The little guy was avoiding their eyes, his ears falling flat against his head. He looked awfully guilty. Should have frowned at the cat. "Any reason why you were gone all night yesterday?" he asked, the same disapproving tone he used while scolding his students. Broccoli just meowed again and started squirming, trying to get down. With a sigh, Broccoli let him down, and Broccoli eagerly landed on his feet next to Slushy, who wasted no time in throwing herself at the smaller cat, purring and grooming him affectionately. "Well, at least you came home unharmed," Shoda muttered, shaking his head as he closed and locked the front door. The cat looked up at him and walked closer to bump his head against his leg, almost like he was apologizing. Yeah, I'm glad to see you too, problem cat," Shoda grumbled affectionately, a small smile appearing on his tired face. With another meow, Broccoli and Slushy headed further into the apartment, probably to go and eat. The poor kitten must be starving. Toshinori turned to Shoda, only for his smile to drop when he noticed how Shoda's gaze had suddenly darkened. "Show?" Toshinori asked, but was interrupted as Shoda pushed past him and reached for Broccoli, lifting him up with no warning. Toshinori gasped at the same time that the kitten meowed in shock. After all, they both knew Shoda never did something like that without checking first. "You're limping," Shoda hissed, holding Broccoli's right front paw in one hand and glaring down at it. The cat's eyes widened, and he started struggling even more than before. But Shoda didn't let up. Instead, just muttered something and got a towel, before effectively wrapping up the hissing fluff ball into a burrito, holding him gently but firmly while he sat down on the couch to check the paw. Toshinori walked closer, looking down at it too, only to frown in confusion. The paw looked fine to him, but for some reason Shoda was scowling at it. "What's wrong?" Toshinori asked carefully, growing worried the longer the man stayed quiet. "It doesn't seem to be broken," Shoda muttered, a deep scowl on his face. "But—" He paused, his scowl deepening as he trailed off. "But?" Toshinori pushed, moving to sit down next to them on the couch to get a closer look. For a moment, Shoda didn't answer, looking deep in thought as he ran a thumb over the small paw. "It's also not right. It feels crooked," Shoda eventually muttered. Meanwhile, Broccoli seemed to have given up on escaping, and was currently sulking in the man's lap, letting him do as he pleased. Toshinori sympathized with him and reached down to scratch him behind the ear, earning him a weak purr. "So, what does that mean?" he asked, turning his gaze back up to his partner. Shoda's mouth formed into a thin line before he sighed and shook his head. "No idea. Maybe he got hurt," he mumbled, getting an almost distant look in his eyes and shaking his head again. "Or it might be from something missing from his diet. He doesn't seem to be in any pain, at least. I'll have to ask Nezu since the V card is off the table," he continued to mutter. "Unless it gets worse, then we'll have to see a doctor. You got it, problem cat?" Shoda then said sternly, glaring down at Broccoli, who was now staring back with the glare of his own. Toshinori frowned at that. "Well, at least he doesn't seem to be in any pain. Perhaps it's an old injury that we never noticed before. From before we found him, maybe?" he suggested, really hoping it wasn't some malformation caused by a lack in his diet. He didn't know if he could live with himself if he had somehow caused the poor kitten to get hurt. Yeah, maybe, Shoda sighed, having gone back to having that faraway look in his eyes. Toshinori was just about to ask if he was okay when Broccoli finally seemed to have reached his limit. The kitten was squirming and meowed unhappily at them, asking to be let out. With another sigh, Shoda released him from the towel, and Broccoli wasted no time in jumping down from his lap and running to the other side of the room to shake himself off. And now that Toshinori knew what to look for, even he could see there was a slight limp to the cat's steps. It wasn't obvious, and he was impressed that Shoda managed to spot it, but now that he knew about it, it was undeniably there. With a shake of his head, Toshinori stood up. Well, at least he is home now, and he seems to be feeling okay. So, what do you say we go and eat dinner? He asked Shoda, reaching down and pulling him up from the couch. At the mention of food, Slushy suddenly meowed loudly and stormed into the kitchen, almost knocking Broccoli over as she barreled past him at full speed. They both chuckled at the sight, glad that her appetite seemed to be back. For once, Shoda didn't scold him for giving the cats a bit of extra food. He even saw the man sneakingly giving them both snacks after dinner, which made him smile fondly. Going to sleep that night, it really felt like it would be all right. The next night, Broccoli once again didn't come home. Toshinori felt disappointment deep in his non-existent stomach. Just like the first night, he made a round of calls, both to Nezu and Hattori from the hospital, but no one had seen the little guy anywhere. Shoda was standing by the window again, frowning out of it and cursing under his breath. But at least Slushy seemed calmer tonight. The cat was currently lying curled up on the couch. She would occasionally glance up towards the front door before huffing and laying her head back down. She looked a bit lonely, but it seemed like just the knowledge that Broccoli would come home eventually was enough to calm her down. If only the same could be said for his husband. Cautiously, Toshinori stepped foot in the office and approached the man. Come on, Sho. Let's go to bed. I am sure that he is all right, Toshinori said gently, laying an arm around the other's tense shoulders. Shoda sighed and dragged a hand over his face. We can't know that, the man gritted out, looking tired. I know, Toshinori sighed, rubbing circles along Shoda's back. But we also know that if he doesn't want to be found, then there's not much we can do about it. So let's just trust him, all right? The man kept his gaze firmly out the window, frowning, until, eventually, he sighed, his shoulders sagging with defeat as he looked over at Toshinori. Fine, Shoda sighed, giving the outside one last glance before taking Toshinori's offered hand and letting himself be led to the bedroom. Toshinori smiled softly, pushing down his own worry. It was like he said, they just had to trust that the little guy knew what he was doing and was staying safe, wherever he was. Broccoli's point of view. Going home last night had hopefully been the right choice, even if Shoda had been a little, tiny bit overbearing with his worrying over his paw. He really would have liked keeping his limp hidden longer, but he guessed the worry made Shoda more keen on noticing small details like that. But malformed paw aside, Broccoli just hoped they were a bit calmer now that they knew he would eventually come home, that they knew he hadn't just abandoned them. Broccoli shook his head, clearing it of any sad thoughts. He was just about to shuffle into his makeshift nest of his bag and sweaters when a sound from outside made him stop. His ears twitched. There was something, or someone, outside. Immediately, all of Broccoli's instincts went into overdrive and, keeping his body low, he turned towards the entrance to his shed and listened intently. And sure enough, he heard something shuffling around in the grass, right outside the blocked opening. until suddenly it stopped. For a moment, the only sounds that could be heard was the wind howling outside. Not even the vestiges dared to make a sound, though he could feel them staying close to the front of his mind, ready to act should there be any danger. It stayed quiet, and Broccoli started to wonder if he had just imagined it, when suddenly there was a knock, startling all of them. "Broccoli? Are you in there?" A familiar and cheerful voice called out. Broccoli's ears twitched, and he immediately rushed over to push away the barricade he had built. Turns out, it wasn't as sturdy as he thought, seeing how even a small and weak kitten form managed to easily knock over the bucket and plank that was supposedly keeping him safe. Broccoli pushed his head out through the hole in the wall, meeting the eyes of his uncle and friend. "Hello, Broccoli," Nezu said with a smile. The mammal looked oddly out of place, and yet completely at peace out here in the dark forest, wearing a thick and comfy-looking coat. He was sitting down on the small blanket in the grass, with the steaming thermos in his paws. Taking a deep breath revealed it to be his usual oolong tea. "I apologize for intruding so late," Nezu said conversationally, like this was somehow a normal occurrence. "But your dad's called me earlier tonight, and I had a feeling you would be here." At the mention of his dad's, Broccoli started backing into the shed, eyeing Nezu doubtfully. He didn't even question how Nezu found him. This was Nezu, after all. No, Broccoli was much more concerned of why the small principal was here. Is he here to bring me back? To scold me? As if he knew exactly what he had been thinking, Nezu's smile turned softer. Now, no need to look so scared. I'm not here to force you into doing anything you don't want to do, the mammal reassured him. Hearing that, Broccoli felt himself relax, and he hesitantly took a small step closer, only to shiver at the cold air outside and curling further into himself. "That being said," Nezu continued, his own fur bristling a little from the cold, even while wearing a coat, "I do have an offer for you." Broccoli tilted his head at him, beckoning him to continue. "While I understand why you are doing this, given your internships are coming up, I also cannot, with a safe conscience, just leave you out here alone. So if you need somewhere to stay, you are more than welcome to stay in my apartment back at UA." Broccoli blinked at him, unsure what to say. After all, he didn't want to be a burden. "You would not be a burden. In fact, I would feel much safer knowing you weren't spending your night out here." If he didn't already know what Nezu's quirk was, he would have seriously thought the mammal was a mind reader. Still, he wasn't sure. It kind of felt like a betrayal to his dads. After everything he put them through, it didn't really feel like he deserved this kindness. "Kiddo, please, just go with him. There is absolutely no reason to torture yourself like this," Nana practically begged him. "Exactly. Please don't distance yourself any further, Izu," Hikage said sadly. The others agreed. "There is nothing wrong in accepting help," Yoichi added. After just a small moment of hesitation, and some more coaxing from the vestiges, Broccoli nodded, before going back inside to get his things ready. Izuku quickly emptied his bag of the sweaters and packed his school things, before doing his usual routine of shuffling the things out of the hole, crawling back out as Broccoli, before changing back into a human. He winced a bit at the strain of going over his limit, but didn't say anything as he put his shoes and backpack on. All the while, Nezu was watching him, calmly sipping on this thermos of tea. "All done?" his mentor asked, and Izuku nodded, gripping the straps of his bag tightly. "Good!" The mammal jumped to his feet and gathered his blanket. "Let's go home, then, shall we?" Author's notes. Uncle Nezu to the rescue. To everyone who guessed Nezu would be the one to find him, here's a cookie! Thank you, everyone, for reading and for leaving such lovely comments. Hope you have a wonderful day. P.S. Next chapter is almost finished and should be up later this week. Hope you look forward to it. And that is a wrap on chapter 23. I feel like I entered a flow state reading this chapter. Like, my mouth is just moving while reading the words, and I'm not really putting any thought into what I'm saying. Um, that being said, I think I read with a lot less mistakes, and then I did also still make a lot of mistakes. And what the heck was up with Nezu's voice? Sorry about that. I hope you guys all enjoyed this one. Please leave Texiliaz some love. And please leave a comment on this video. I love reading your comments. They make me really happy to read your comments. And I go in and I heart every single one. Because they just make me that happy. Anyway, I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye bye, pups.